In the summer of 1975, two young sisters vanished without a trace from a small Illinois town. No suspects, no evidence, just one strange detail. Their mother had recently brought home a doll, one that looked an awful lot like Chucky. Almost 50 years later, during a home renovation, the truth finally came to light, and what they uncovered will haunt you long after this story ends. It was the summer of 1975. Lorraine, 34, had been a single mother for 3 years now. Her husband had walked out one evening and never came back, not even a note. She didn't talk about it, not to friends, not to family, and certainly not to her daughters, Emily and Sarah. The three of them lived in a modest, slightly run-down, two-story house on the edge of town. Money was tight. Lorraine cleaned offices at night and took whatever odd job she could during the day, sometimes skipping meals just to make sure her girls had what they needed. Hey friend, if you would love to support what I do here, kindly consider hitting the subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Let's get back to the story. It was on one of those odd job afternoons. She had responded to a flyer in the laundromat window. Help needed, sorting old estate items. The address was a few miles out of town, almost in the woods. The man who greeted her was in his 60s, grizzled but polite. Said his name was Mr. Winthorpe. His aunt had passed, and he was liquidating everything from her old farmhouse. He paid her $10 for the afternoon, good money, considering, and let her take home anything she wanted from the unsold pile. That's when she saw it. The doll sat in a worn wooden rocker in the corner of the attic. It wasn't like the soft-bodied dolls Sarah loved or the baby dolls popular that year. This one was older. Hard plastic, with hand-painted eyes that glistened like they had just been varnished. Its hair was bright orange and stiff, like it had been curled with glue. The outfit was tattered, a small set of overalls over a red and white striped shirt. It was about 2 feet tall, one of the hands was chipped. Still, there was something charming about it, unique, antique-looking. Mr. Winthorpe noticed her staring and chuckled. That thing's been in the family forever. Don't know why she kept it. Gave me the creeps as a kid. Lorraine laughed it off, though something in her stomach turned slightly. But Sarah had a birthday coming up, she loved dolls, and Lorraine couldn't afford new toys. It was free, after all. When she brought it home, Sarah's eyes lit up. Emily, on the other hand, didn't even want to touch it. "Why does it look like it's staring at me?" Emily asked, squinting at the doll's glossy eyes. "It's just old, honey," Lorraine said, brushing a cobweb off its back. "Be nice. It's your sister's now." Sarah named the doll Charlie. She didn't know why. She said the name just popped into her head. That night, she insisted Charlie sleep in bed with her, snuggled tight under her arm. From the very first night, things began to change. The house creaked louder than usual. Lorraine chalked it up to summer humidity warping the wood, but even the dog next door barked more whenever it was near the girl's bedroom window. On the second night, the power flickered for a full 2 minutes, though no one else on the street reported an outage. On the third night, Sarah started talking to Charlie. Not like a child playing pretend, not make-believe. Conversations. Lorraine passed by the cracked door around midnight and heard whispers. Paused, thinking maybe Emily was still up. But the voice answering Sarah was not her sister's. It was deep. Too low for a child. But when she pushed the door open, Sarah was alone, giggling, holding the doll close. "Charlie told me a secret," Sarah said dreamily. Lorraine forced a smile. "That's so? What kind of secret?" "I can't tell. Or you'll be next." Lorraine blinked. Next for what? But Sarah only grinned, her fingers idly stroking the doll's painted face. By the end of the first week, Emily began to complain of nightmares. "It's watching me when I sleep," she whispered to her mother. "Even when my eyes are closed, I feel it." Lorraine, stressed and exhausted, dismissed it. "Sweetheart, it's just a toy. If it's scaring you, we'll move it to Sarah's side." But when she entered the room that night, the doll was already on Emily's bed. Emily swore she had moved it earlier, that it always came back. Lorraine began waking up in strange places around the house. Once on the kitchen floor with a knife on the table, though she didn't remember making breakfast. Once on the back porch in her nightgown, barefoot. Her sleep felt like blackouts. The worst was when she found a drawing in the girls' room. A crude picture of the family, but she was scratched out, A stick figure lay in red marker beside it, a child's attempt at blood pooling around the drawn body. "Charlie says we'll be happier," was scrawled underneath, in Sarah's uneven handwriting. Still, Lorraine clung to denial. It had been a hard year. The girls were probably just acting out, the stress, the heat, her own fatigue. It had to be taking a toll. Then, one morning, she found Emily's bed empty. Panic set in, but she was in the kitchen, sitting stiffly at the table, staring into space. She'd peed herself. When Lorraine shook her, she blinked and whispered, "He's under the bed now." Oh, but Emily just began to cry and didn't stop for hours. Lorraine hid the doll in the attic that night, locking it in an old trunk. She didn't tell Sarah. She just couldn't take it anymore. By morning, it was back in Sarah's arms. Lorraine's hands trembled as she watched Sarah stroke the doll's hair that morning. Charlie sat perched on her lap at the breakfast table like nothing had happened. Like Lorraine hadn't wrapped it in a quilt, stuffed it into a trunk, and locked it in the attic just hours before. She stared at it, mouth slightly open, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Did you, get that from the attic?" she asked carefully. Sarah looked up, a spoon halfway to her mouth. "No, he came back on his own." Emily, sitting across the table, pushed her bowl of cereal away and left the room silently. She hadn't spoken much in the last 2 days. Dark circles had formed under her eyes. She looked pale, fragile. Lorraine wanted to reach out and grab her, hold her, tell her everything was going to be okay. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned back to Sarah. "Honey, I think we should put Charlie away for a little while, just until your birthday's over." Sarah's eyes narrowed in a way that didn't belong on a 7-year-old. "He doesn't like that. I don't care what he likes," Lorraine said, a little more harshly than she intended. Sarah stood up. The chair made a sharp screech as it scraped the floor. She clutched the doll tightly to her chest, her mouth twitching with something between a sneer and a pout. Then, without a word, she stomped off toward her bedroom. That night, Lorraine didn't sleep at all. She lay in bed with the door locked, eyes fixed on the ceiling, every creak of the house tightening her muscles. Around 3 a.m., the hall light flickered on. She sat up, heart pounding. She could hear footsteps, small, shuffling steps moving down the hallway. A soft giggle echoed faintly. She grabbed her flashlight and quietly opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the light in the girls' room was on. When she stepped inside, both girls were sound asleep in their beds. The doll sat on the floor, directly between them, facing the door. The next morning, Emily was sick, vomiting, feverish. Lorraine kept her home from school, placing a cold cloth on her forehead. Emily barely spoke, only mumbling, "He's mad at me," over and over again. When asked who, she would just look toward Sarah's room. Lorraine started noticing more disturbing signs. The light bulbs in the girls' room blew out constantly. The radio would change stations on its own, always stopping on static. The television, an old Zenith, flickered with strange black and white images, almost like home videos, but none Lorraine recognized. And then the drawings started showing up again, more violent this time. One was of a burning house, another of Lorraine, this time with her head missing and blood spraying like a fountain. Each drawing signed in tiny print, Charlie. At work, Lorraine confided in her boss, Mrs. Delaney, an older woman who had lived in town her whole life. She didn't give every detail, just said her daughter had an old doll that was starting to scare her. To Lorraine's surprise, Mrs. Delaney grew quiet and looked at her with a strange expression. "Was it red hair?" she asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Striped shirt, overalls, plastic skin, not porcelain." Vervaine's stomach turned to lead. "How did you know?" Mrs. Delaney stood up and walked to a drawer in the office desk. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping and handed it over. The headline read, "2 local children found dead in barn fire. Dog found at scene. No one claims ownership." It was dated 1943. Lorraine scanned the article, eyes darting. The story was simple and chilling. 2 children had gone missing in the area, only to be found days later in a burned barn several miles away. There was no clear sign of what caused the fire, but what stood out was the final paragraph. Authorities recovered a child's doll near the bodies, described as a red-haired plastic figure in tattered overalls and striped shirt. The origin of the doll remains unknown and no family has claimed it. Some locals have linked it to rumors of a haunted toy traded through estate sales, but police deny any such connection. Lorraine returned home, shaken. She wanted to get rid of it immediately. Burn it, smash it, anything. But when she searched Sarah's room, the doll wasn't there. Sarah was sitting on her bed, arms crossed. "He's hiding," she said simply, "because you're thinking bad things. Sarah, I need you to tell me where the doll is. He says if you touch him again, you'll never wake up." Lorraine stared at her daughter in disbelief. Sarah's face was blank. Not defiant, not scared, just vacant. Emily screamed that night. Lorraine found her in the bathroom, curled up on the tile floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her arms were scratched. Tiny, shallow cuts, dozens of them. "He told me to do it," she sobbed. "He said it was the only way to shut him up." Lorraine wrapped her in a towel and rocked her back and forth. She didn't call a doctor. She didn't call anyone. How could she explain this? She'd put Emily in her bed and sat on the floor between the girls' rooms, holding a hammer in her lap, waiting for something to happen. Anything. At 2:43 a.m., the house grew cold. Not cool. Cold. Her breath fogged in the air. From the hallway, she heard a whisper, not a child. Not Sarah. Not even human. It said one word. "Fine." She bolted up and ran into Sarah's room. The doll was there, sitting upright on the bed. Its eyes, they looked glassy, wet. Lorraine didn't hesitate. She grabbed it by the arm, ran to the fireplace, and threw it in. The flames crackled. The room filled with smoke. But the doll didn't burn. It sat in the fire, unmoving, and smiled. Lorraine backed away from the fireplace, coughing through the smoke, eyes locked on the doll. The flames licked around it, but the thing didn't blacken or melt. It just sat there, unmoving, a faint gleam in its glassy eyes that caught the flickering firelight in a way that felt deliberate. Then the flames began to die down, not naturally, but like they were being smothered from within. The logs were still there, burning, yet the fire dulled to embers in seconds. By the time Lorraine blinked the tears out of her eyes, the room had gone still again. And Charlie was sitting upright on the brick hearth, untouched, a blackened scorch mark under him like a throne of ash. He screamed. She didn't remember grabbing the girls or how she made it to the car, only that it was just before 3 a.m. when they peeled out of the driveway in her rusted Pontiac, headlights barely piercing the fog that had crept in around the house. Emily clung to her in the front seat, shivering. Sarah didn't say a word, sitting in the back seat with her arms folded and her head tilted back like she was looking at something behind her. They drove for nearly an hour, ending up in a motel on the edge of Springfield. Lorraine paid in cash using the last $40 she had hidden in a shoebox in her closet. She triple-locked the door, pushed the dresser in front of it, and made both girls sleep in the same bed beside her. She didn't sleep, just sat in the motel's single chair, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling as headlights passed on the highway. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of static. The old motel television had turned on by itself. On the screen was a grainy black and white image. A girl standing in the woods, blonde hair, a striped shirt, but no face, just a blur where her features should be. Emily stirred beside her and let out a sharp scream. Sitting in the middle of the motel carpet was the doll, Charlie. Lorraine kicked it across the room with a scream, backing into the wall, panting. "I threw you in the fire! I burned you!" she screamed at it, as if that would make a difference. Sarah sat up, yawning. "He said you'd try again. You always do." Emily was sobbing again, crawling under the covers. That was the moment Lorraine realized she couldn't run. She called Father Reed, the pastor at St. Mark's, back in their hometown. He wasn't someone she'd spoken to in years, not since before her husband vanished, but she remembered his sermons, especially the ones about evil. The old kind, the quiet kind. He agreed to meet her at the church later that night. "Leave the doll with me," he said gently, after she told him most of the story, enough at least to make him pale and cross himself 3 times. They met in the sanctuary around 9 p.m., the girls asleep in the car. Lorraine placed Charlie on the altar, wrapped in a wool blanket. Father Reed was already lighting candles, murmuring under his breath. He placed the Bible on the altar beside the doll and began reading. Lorraine stood back, arms crossed tightly. At first, nothing happened. The candles flickered, the air was heavy. Then a crack sounded. Loud, unnatural, like bone snapping. The front doors of the church burst open with a howling gust of wind. The candles went out instantly, and something shrieked. Not a voice, not animal, something older, something angry. The stained glass windows cracked, the cross behind the altar tilted slightly. Father Reed kept reading louder, his voice shaking. Charlie began to smoke. A thick, black mist curled from its body like ink in water, rising toward the ceiling, slithering along the rafters. Then the doll jerked, its arm twitching once, then again. Its head turned slowly, almost thoughtfully, toward the priest. Father Reed's voice faltered. The mist lunged. The candles flared up in unison and then went out. Lorraine screamed. When the lights came back on, just as suddenly as they had gone out, Father Reed was unconscious, collapsed behind the altar. Charlie was gone. She ran to him, shaking him awake. He was bleeding from his ears, whispering something over and over again. Not a doll, never a doll, a house. She didn't understand. But he pressed a key into her hand. Take him somewhere safe. Do not go back to that house. She drove all night. The girls were quiet. Emily still clung to her, trembling. Sarah kept humming to herself in the back seat, some old nursery rhyme Lorraine didn't recognize. She found a friend 3 counties away, an old roommate from nursing school, and begged to stay with her for a few days. She didn't tell her everything, just said there'd been a break-in, that they were scared. The friend didn't ask too many questions. For a while, things calmed. Sarah stopped talking about Charlie. Emily began to eat again. Lorraine started to believe it might be over. Then came the drawings. They weren't Sarah's. Emily had started drawing now. Dark, detailed pictures of a doll in flames, of a man with no face, of their house covered in strange symbols, of a staircase that didn't exist in their home, leading downward into a place Lorraine didn't recognize. One picture chilled her to the bone, a small hidden door behind the fireplace. Had never seen such a thing. But something in her gut twisted. She remembered what Father Reed had said. Not a doll, a house. The evil wasn't in Charlie. It was in where he'd been kept. The doll was just a vessel, something that moved from place to place. Man, the real thing had never left. It had always lived inside those walls. Lorraine didn't want to believe it. After all the horror, after everything that had happened, the idea that the doll hadn't been the source but merely a symptom, that the house itself was sick, was too much. But the drawings kept coming. Emily, who hadn't picked up a crayon in weeks, was suddenly possessed with focus. She drew in silence for hours, her tongue pressed into the corner of her mouth, eyes vacant. Every drawing was of the house, but not as it was. It was as if she could see inside it, beneath it. The walls were filled with faces, weeping or screaming, mouths wide in voiceless agony. There were staircases that spiraled down into dirt, black pits, symbols that Lorraine had never seen in her life but gave her the chills just to look at. She showed one drawing to a priest in the neighboring town. A young, earnest man named Father Jensen. He flipped through the pages and stopped cold on one filled with angular, jagged symbols, like runes carved in haste. His face lost color. Where did your daughter see this? She drew it, Lorraine replied. She said she just sees it in her head, like it's being whispered to her. Father Jensen set the papers down. These symbols are old, pre-Christian. They look like binding glyphs. Some of them are protective, others aren't. Protective, she asked. Against what? He looked at her long and hard. But whatever was never supposed to be let out. That night, Emily woke up screaming. Lorraine found her standing on the edge of the balcony in her friend's home, eyes wide open, arms spread like she was sleepwalking. The wind blew her hair into her face. Lorraine caught her just before she stepped off. She said I had to fly, Emily murmured as Lorraine held her tight. She said the house is calling. It's hungry. And I'm the right size. Lorraine didn't ask who she was. She didn't need to. The next morning, Sarah was gone. No one saw her leave. The door was locked, the window shut. But on the kitchen table was a single sheet of paper, drawn in black crayon. It was the house again. Their old house, but this time it wasn't alone. Beside it was a stick figure girl holding hands with a red hand doll. And underneath, written in blocky, childlike scrawl, I'm going home. Panic was too small a word for what Lorraine felt. She tore through the streets in her car, retracing every road, every memory. She called police. No one had seen Sarah. No one had seen a little girl with red hair or an old doll in overalls. But Lorraine knew. The house had taken her back. He drove straight there. The property had sat empty for weeks. Weeds crept up through the driveway cracks. The mailbox hung open, a spider's web glinting in the sunlight. The front door was unlocked, though she was certain she'd locked it the day they left. Inside, the house smelled wrong, not rotten, just old, like dust and smoke and the sour breath of something that had been breathing too long in the dark. Sarah? Lorraine called out, her voice cracking. No response. The living room looked exactly as they'd left it. The furniture covered with blankets, toys scattered on the floor, but the air felt heavier, dense, like walking underwater. She walked to the fireplace. There was no door behind it, nothing hidden in the bricks or in the wall, but she remembered Emily's drawing, the small hatch just beneath the mantel. She ran her fingers along the edge. A click, then the wall shifted, not visually, but spiritually, a ripple. And suddenly, there was a hatch. Small, just large enough for a child. She hesitated only a moment before grabbing the poker from the fireplace and prying it open. Inside was a narrow downward staircase carved directly into the stone, old, wet, cold. She didn't call the police. She didn't think they'd believe her, and more importantly, she didn't think she had time. Flashlight in hand, she descended. The tunnel was silent, save for the drip of unseen water and the occasional groan of the earth above. The walls were lined with carvings, more of the same symbols from Emily's drawings. As she reached the bottom, a low hum began, vibrating in her chest. A noise so deep, it felt like her own bones were trembling. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, and in the center of that chamber, Sarah stood. Her back was to Lorraine. In front of her sat Charlie, placed on a pedestal made of rough black stone. Sarah, Lorraine whispered, tears already streaming. Sarah turned slowly. Her eyes were empty. Not blank, empty. Like someone had scooped out the light behind them and replaced it with cold air. She likes it here, Sarah said flatly. She says this was always her room. Who does, baby? Lorraine pleaded. Come back with me. Let's go home. This is home now. No, it's not. It's never been. This place is evil, Sarah. But Sarah was already shaking her head. She was here before the house. The house was built for her. Lorraine took a step forward, then another. She reached out, but Sarah backed away, toward the pedestal. She says if I leave, she'll take Emily instead. And at that moment, Charlie's eyes moved. Not a blink, not a trick of the light. They shifted, focused, looked at Lorraine, and grinned. Lorraine lunged forward with a cry, grabbing Sarah's wrist and yanking her away from the pedestal. The little girl didn't resist, but she didn't help either. She just stared at the doll as Lorraine pulled her toward the tunnel. But they didn't get far. The stone chamber began to hum louder, so loud that Lorraine felt her molars ache. The walls vibrated. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the doorway they had come through, it was gone. Not blocked. Go on. Where the arch had been, there was now only solid, seamless stone. No, Lorraine gasped. No, no, no. She turned in a circle, searching for another exit, but there was nothing. Just the walls, the pedestal, and the doll. Charlie hadn't moved from his seat, but somehow he felt closer, like he was expanding, taking up more space with each passing second. Sarah slipped out of Lorraine's grip and walked back to the pedestal. "Sarah, please," Lorraine begged. "Don't listen to her. Don't listen to it. It's lying to you." "She says it's not a lie if it's always been true," Sarah replied in a voice that sounded far too calm. "You're the one who keeps pretending." "I'm not pretending. You said Daddy left us, but she says he didn't." The rain froze. Sarah turned her head slowly, eyes gleaming with something not her own. "She says he's here." Lorraine's mouth went dry. "What?" "He says he came down here just like us." The pedestal pulsed. Suddenly, the shadows shifted. In the far corner of the room, something emerged, a shape indistinct but human-sized. It was hunched, like it had forgotten how to stand, and its skin glistened with a wet sheen. Lorraine couldn't make out the face, but the outline, the shoulders, the height. Her heart stopped. "Michael," she whispered. The figure didn't speak. It stepped forward, one foot dragging as if broken. The smell of rot and earth filled the air. "No," she whispered again. "That's not him. That's not your father." But Sarah was already smiling. "She said he stayed behind to keep her company. He's part of the house now." Lorraine backed away, dragging Sarah again, more forcefully now. The figure stopped walking, but only because the walls began to move. The chamber twisted like a living thing, edges warping. The pedestal split open, revealing a spiral of stairs leading down. So many stairs. Lorraine shook her head violently. "We're not going down there, we're leaving now." Sarah turned back to her, and this time her voice changed. It was layered, like two voices speaking at once, hers and something older. "You can't leave, you're hers now." The walls screamed. That was the only way to describe it, a high-pitched, hollow wail that made Lauren fall to her knees. She shoved Sarah behind her and covered the girl's ears. A moment later, the sound stopped. Silence. Then a voice, echoing around the room, curling like smoke. "Blood binds, secrets rot, one stays, one goes." Lorraine didn't move. The pedestal flickered, yes, flickered, and Charlie was suddenly gone. In his place sat a new doll, but this one looked different. It had Sarah's hair, her face. Lorraine screamed. Sarah, the real Sarah, was still behind her, clinging to her back, crying now. Lorraine turned and scooped her up, cradling her tight. "I've got you. I've got you." A door appeared in the stone wall. No warning, no noise, it simply was, as if it had always been there. Barry didn't question it. She ran. She didn't look back, not even when the voices behind her began to chant, not even when the walls seemed to reach for her. She just held Sarah tight and ran until her legs gave out and the tunnel spat them out into the front yard of the house. It was dawn. Birds were chirping. Everything looked normal. Lorraine collapsed on the lawn, sobbing. Emily came running from the neighbor's porch, where the friend had kept her overnight. She hugged her sister, then looked up at her mother. "Did she see the basement?" Emily asked. Lorraine looked at her, stunned. "How did you know about the basement?" Emily pointed to her temple. "She shows me things sometimes. She likes it when people remember her." Lorraine stood up slowly, clutching Sarah and staring at the house. The front door was open. A quiet creak echoed in the breeze. Inside, the fireplace had been filled in with bricks. There was no hatch, no sign of a tunnel, no pedestal, but a single photo now sat on the mantel. Lorraine walked to the doorway and looked closer. It was a photo of her family. Her, Michael, Sarah, Emily, and Charlie, in Michael's arms. Lorraine turned to stone. That photo had never existed. They had never taken a picture like that. And there it was, framed, perfect, burnt along the edges. That night they left town for good, to never return to the house. Not to collect clothes, not to explain. She sent the mortgage bank a note and mailed her keys from across the country. But for the rest of her life, Lorraine would never again sleep with the lights off. And she'd never owned another doll. Sarah no longer smiled the way she used to. Lorraine first noticed it one afternoon in late October. The air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath her feet as she returned from the store, arms full of groceries. She saw Sarah sitting perfectly still on the porch swing, her legs dangling, eyes locked on the horizon like she was waiting for something. or someone. Charlie sat in her lap, hands folded neatly, his wide plastic grin aimed directly at the house across the street. Lorraine tried not to shiver. "Hey, sweetie," she said gently, stepping up the porch. "What you up to?" Sarah didn't look at her, listening. Listening to what? She's talking to me again. Lorraine felt her skin tighten. "Who?" Sarah tilted her head slowly toward the doll. "Her?" That night, they found the neighbor's cat dead behind the garage. Its neck was broken. Emily was the one who discovered it and came running inside, sobbing. "It was Muffin. She was just lying there." Lorraine rushed out to see for herself. The cat's body was twisted unnaturally, the ground around it undisturbed. No sign of a fight, no paw prints, just the still, broken animal, eyes wide in terror. She couldn't bring herself to tell the girls what had happened. Instead, she quietly buried Muffin behind the garden after they went to bed. But Sarah already knew. As she walked into the kitchen the next morning, eyes bright, voice cheerful. "Did you say a prayer when you buried her?" Laura nearly dropped her coffee mug. "What?" "For Muffin," Sarah said, swinging her feet as she sat at the table. "She told me you buried her last night, right next to where the woman used to sleep." Lorraine slowly sat down. "What woman?" "The one under the garden." Sarah then began humming a tune Lorraine didn't recognize. It sounded old, foreign, almost like a lullaby. She sang it over and over, tapping her fingers to the rhythm. Charlie was clutched tightly in one arm, his face inches from hers. "Sarah, where did you hear that song?" Lorraine asked. Larry shrugged. "She sings it to me when I sleep." "The lady from the dirt." Emily refused to eat breakfast. She kept staring at Sarah, her spoon untouched in her cereal bowl. That afternoon, Lorraine checked out 6 books from the town library, on the occult, on folklore, on early Illinois settlements. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for anymore, just something that made sense of the things her youngest daughter was saying. And that was before the incident with the birds. One morning, she stepped outside to hang laundry and found a circle of dead sparrows around the garden, 7 of them, evenly spaced, as if someone had placed them there like clock numbers, not torn up, not eaten, just dead. Chief one facing the house. Lorraine knelt slowly, her hands trembling. One of the birds had something tucked under its wing, a scrap of paper. She carefully unfolded it. A child's drawing, crude crayon lines, red and black, the house again, and this time there were crosses above it, like graves, like something waiting in the sky. She turned to look at the second-floor window. Sarah stood there, watching. Later that night, Emily pulled Lorraine aside, tears in her eyes. "I don't want to sleep near her anymore." "Emily, honey, your sister is—" "She's not my sister anymore," the girl whispered. Lorraine froze. "What do you mean?" Emily clenched her fists. "She talks to it all night, not with words, with whispers like bugs crawling in the walls. I hear it. It says things about people, about what they did, about what they deserve." Her voice shook. "Last night, she told me she knows what Dad looks like now. Said she saw him down below. Said he has eyes like nails." Lorraine hugged her tightly. "It's not real, sweetie. She's just playing." "She's not playing, Mom. She's becoming." Emily refused to sleep in the same room after that. Lorraine moved her mattress to the living room. Sarah never said anything about it. In fact, she barely spoke to Emily anymore. But that same night, when Lorraine passed by her room, she found Sarah wide awake, sitting upright in bed, and speaking Latin. At first, Lorraine thought she was dreaming, but as she pushed the door open, the words became clear, harsh consonants, strange rhythm, not like a child playing pretend, like something ancient speaking through her. The doll sat in her lap, eyes glowing in the moonlight. Lorraine stepped into the room. "Sarah!" Her daughter blinked once, slowly, and the words stopped. She smiled, not her usual warm smile. This one was knowing, like she'd caught her mother spying on her. "You're not supposed to hear that," Sarah whispered. Lorraine asleep that night. The next day, she found a new drawing pinned to the fridge. This time, it wasn't of the house. It was a woman, standing in a field, surrounded by flames. In one hand, she held a baby. In the other, the doll. At her feet were bones. When Lorraine asked Sarah about it, she just said, "She showed me what came before." Before what? Lorraine never found out. Later that week, Emily stopped talking completely. She sat on the porch for hours each day, staring into nothing. Her eyes were always red, like she'd been crying. Sarah, meanwhile, began wearing the doll's clothes. She fashioned little aprons and overalls to match Charlie's. She refused to bathe, and the skin under her fingernails was always black with dirt. Lorraine didn't recognize her anymore. Her baby girl was slipping away, and the house was getting colder even as fall deepened. Like it was waiting for something, and it wouldn't have to wait much longer. Rain hammered the roof like it was trying to get in. Thunder rolled across the fields in long, drawn-out moans, and the lightning came in sharp bursts, quick flashes that lit up the house for only a second before plunging it into darkness again. Lorraine blinked awake, cold and wet. She was lying on the ground, not in her bed, not even in the house, and in the woods. She sat up slowly, disoriented. Her flannel nightgown clung to her body, soaked through. Her knees were scraped, her hair matted to her face. She could feel the squelch of mud between her toes. She looked around, shivering. Where was she? How had she gotten here? The trees looked familiar, but not quite. Gnarled, older than they should have been, like they'd been waiting for decades for someone to return. The air was thick, almost buzzing, like a storm still crackling around her even though the worst of it had passed. Lorraine stood up on shaking legs. There's no flashlight, no coat, no memory of leaving the house. The last thing she could remember was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the doll's music box melody drifting faintly from Sarah's room. That same tune Sarah kept humming all month. The one that didn't exist outside her own nightmares. She started walking. The woods gave way to tall grass, then finally to pavement. Her bare feet slapped against the road, carrying her closer to the house. As it came into view, Lorraine slowed, heart pounding. The front door was open. It's swinging there, back and forth, back and forth. The porch light flickered, casting long, broken shadows. Sarah? Lorraine called out, her voice cracking. Emily? No answer. She ran to the door, threw it wide. The house was in shambles. Curtains ripped, pictures smashed, furniture overturned, like a struggle had taken place, but with no sound, no screaming, no warning, just a terrible, violent quiet. Girls? She sprinted up the stairs, slipping on the wet wood. Sarah's room was empty. So was Emily's makeshift bed in the living room. The blankets had been peeled back, as if someone had lifted her up while she was sleeping. No blood. No signs of forced entry. Just absence. In Sarah's room, the doll sat perfectly upright on the bed. Lorraine screamed. It wasn't the position that got her. It was the expression. Charlie's painted face looked smug. His glassy eyes seemed to follow her, his little lips curved just a fraction higher than usual. Lorraine lunged for the doll and threw it across the room. It hit the far wall, bounced once on the carpet, then landed upright, still sitting, still smiling. That's when she saw the writing on the wall. Not written in pen, but scratched. Deep gouges straight into the plaster above Sarah's bed. One stays, one goes. Lorraine staggered back. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She ran to the phone and called 911. Her voice was barely coherent, babbling that her daughters were missing, that something had taken them, that she'd woken up in the woods with no memory. The dispatcher asked if she was under the influence of anything. She said no. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 cars, 4 officers. They searched the house, the surrounding woods. They asked questions. Lorraine couldn't answer. Had she locked the doors that night? Had there been signs of anyone entering? Could the girls have run away? No. No, they wouldn't. Not in a storm like that. Not Sarah, not Emily, and not together. Not without shoes, not without their coats. The officers found the scratches on the wall. They took photos, but they didn't take the doll. It's just a toy, ma'am, one of them said when she pointed at Charlie, still perched quietly in the corner. No, it's not, she insisted. He did something. He's connected to this. They exchanged glances. Later that day, Lorraine was taken to the hospital for exhaustion, they said, for dehydration, for evaluation. When she told the doctor what happened, that she'd woken up in the woods, that the doll had something to do with the girls vanishing, they wrote it down, but didn't believe her. She could tell. Even her sister, when she came to visit, looked at her like she was teetering on the edge. You've been under so much pressure, her sister said gently, raising them alone, money tight, maybe something just snapped. Or Ray didn't argue. She was too tired. But late at night, when no one was watching, she'd close her eyes and see Sarah smiling in her mind, eyes wide, teeth clenched, humming that cursed lullaby. It haunted her dreams. She stayed in the hospital for 9 days. When she was released, the house had been emptied. Not by her, by the bank. The moment she was admitted, they'd considered her mentally unfit to manage the property. Unpaid bills, no next of kin. They'd boarded it up, marked it for auction. She didn't fight it, didn't want to. She left town with one suitcase and never looked back. The girls were never found. No footprints, no bodies, no evidence, just a few muddy smudges on the hardwood floor and that strange, perfect doll that no one would touch. Some said Lorraine had a psychotic break and killed her daughters, hiding the bodies somewhere in the woods. Others whispered about cults, old magic, cursed objects that carried things inside them. But the case went cold. A whisper in the dark. A scar the town stopped talking about. The headlines came quickly, but they didn't last. 2 sisters missing after storm, mother hospitalized. No sign of foul play, authorities baffled. Family tragedy or something more sinister. For the first few days, the story made ripples beyond the county. Reporters from Chicago came down, pointing cameras at the worn-down house with its boarded-up windows and peeling paint. They hounded the neighbors, asked if Lorraine had ever shown signs of mental illness, if the girls had been unhappy. Most had no answers. "I always saw her walking them to school," one elderly woman said into the camera. "They seemed like a quiet family, poor, yes, but sweet. Sarah was such a pretty little thing, but pretty things disappeared too." Inside the police department, there was confusion. No fingerprints, no forced entry, no footprints leading away from the house, despite the rain-soaked mud all around the property. Often. And then there was Lorraine, sitting in a cold interview room, eyes bloodshot, hair tangled, recounting her story again and again. "I woke up in the woods. I don't remember how I got there. When I came back, the girls were gone. But he was still there." "Who's he?" Detective Marsh asked for the 5th time. "The doll. Charlie. I bought it from a man who came through town. He said it came from a collector's estate. He didn't say anything about what was inside it." "Inside it?" Lorraine nodded, slowly. "He took him." Marsh sat back. He was patient, even gentle, but Lorraine could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. "The doll," he repeated flatly, "took him. I know how it sounds. You said there were drawings, that your daughter was speaking Latin?" "Yes, and singing songs I'd never heard. And she knew things she shouldn't know." "Like what?" Lorraine licked her lips. "She said there was a woman buried under the garden. She told me about Muffin before I even found the cat. She said she could hear the dead whispering through the floorboards." "She's 7, Lorraine. Kids have active imaginations." "No," she snapped, leaning forward. "This wasn't imagination. It was knowledge. She described my husband's accident in detail, even though I never told her how he died. She said his bones made music now." Detective Marsh wrote something down in his notebook and quietly asked a female officer to escort her to rest. A few hours later, a social worker and a psychiatrist arrived. Lorraine was placed under a 72-hour psychiatric hold. The doctors at the state hospital said she was suffering from dissociative delusions, possibly brought on by stress, unresolved trauma, and lack of sleep. She was heavily medicated, monitored, questioned daily. But she didn't budge. She insisted, over and over. The doll took them. No one believed her. Her sister refused to visit again. "I just can't watch her like this," she told the doctor. "She used to be so strong." The girl's case slowly faded from public attention. The leads dried up. The man who sold the doll couldn't be traced. No one had his name, no receipts, no way to verify his existence at all. Lorraine insisted he came through town on a Friday selling antiques out of a rust-colored van. Several people remembered seeing a van parked outside the general store, but no one could recall the man's face. After her release, Lorraine tried to help with the investigation, but the officers quietly told her to stay away. Her credibility was gone. She tried. She wrote letters to occult researchers, to parapsychologists, to anyone who would listen. Most never responded. The few who did asked questions like, "Have you experienced auditory hallucinations before?" or "Did you have any history of sleepwalking as a child?" They didn't get it. No one got it. One night, drunk and alone, Lorraine broke into the old house. She walked through the hollow rooms, flashlight trembling in her hands, calling out their names again and again. Emily, Sarah. The air was still, but there was something in the silence. A low hum, a pressure against her chest, like the walls themselves were breathing, waiting for her to say the right words. She walked into Sarah's old room and found the doll. Still there, sitting perfectly upright on the dusty floor, untouched by time. Lorraine fell to her knees. She screamed, she begged, she demanded that I bring her girls back. Nothing happened. Not at first. But when she reached to grab it, the doll's head slowly tilted on its own, just a few degrees to the right, like it was listening. She stumbled out of the house sobbing. She tried to burn it down the next night. She poured gasoline around the baseboards, lit a match, and watched the flames climb. But when the fire crew arrived the next morning, they found only minor scorching in the kitchen. The fire hadn't spread. Not like it should have. Lorraine was taken in again, this time for arson. The charges didn't stick, she had no priors, and the fire had caused no real damage, but it sealed her fate. She was deemed unstable, untrustworthy, a ghost of a mother whose story made no sense. The girls' names eventually faded from police records, a missing persons file. 2 aging photographs, one of Emily in pigtails wearing her favorite red coat, one of Sarah holding the doll. That image was the only one ever circulated of the toy. After a while, even the officers stopped saying their names. The case was reclassified as unsolved, presumed deceased, and the house, still boarded up, still owned by the banks, sat empty on the edge of town. The locals said it was haunted. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside on Halloween. They always came out pale, shaken. Some said they saw small shadows move behind the curtains. Others heard a lullaby playing in the dark, but no one ever found the doll again. Not until nearly 50 years later, in the spring of 2023, the house finally sold. It had sat for decades on the edge of town, unsold, unloved, avoided like a bad memory. But the market was shifting and buyers were getting bolder. It was advertised as a fixer-upper with historic charm, a 3-bedroom, 2-story craftsman from the 1920s with great bones and limitless potential. That's how Jenna and Marcus Delaney saw it. They were both in their early 30s, newly married, both remote tech workers looking to leave Chicago behind. Jenna had always dreamed of restoring an old house, and Marcus wanted space to work on his music. The price was unbeatable, almost suspiciously low. But they weren't superstitious. They didn't care about small-town gossip or ancient police reports. They knew about the missing girls, of course. Everyone online did. The story had become local legend. There were even Reddit threads about it. Hell, it was just a story. They moved in the last week of March. The place smelled like dust and rot and old insulation, but they were excited. Jenna started a renovation blog called House of Echoes where she documented their progress, stripping wallpaper, replacing floorboards, pulling out rusty nails with a crowbar and a smile. Her followers loved the creepy but cozy vibe. They even joked about the place being haunted. Jenna leaned into it. "If I find a demon in the crawl space, I'll let you all know," she wrote in one post, laughing with her audience. That was in May. By June, they'd started demoing the back hallway closet. It was an odd little space, narrow, boxed in, almost like it had been an afterthought. Marcus had noticed how the closet jutted slightly farther into the room than the architectural plans showed, like someone had added it later. So he knocked on the back panel, hollow. He pried it off with a crowbar. And behind it, in the dim orange light from the work lamp, was a small square of darkness. A hidden space no more than 4 feet high and maybe 6 across. A crawl space that didn't appear on any blueprint. They assumed it was storage. Marcus grabbed his flashlight, ducked inside. It took him less than 3 seconds to scream. Jenna came running, heart pounding. She found Marcus crawling backward out of the hole, white as a sheet. He couldn't speak. He just pointing. Jenna took the flashlight and leaned into the crawl space. There in the far corner were 2 small forms. 2 skeletons, one slightly larger than the other, curled together as if they'd been holding each other. The bones were delicate child size, bits of faded cloth still clung to them, fragments of cotton dresses, small shoes now stiff with time. But that wasn't the worst part. In front of the skeletons, sitting between them, was a doll. still pristine. Painted smile, red hair, overalls, a single freckle on its cheek. His eyes stared back at her, clear, bright, untouched by dust or decay. Jenna froze. Something about the doll felt wrong. Not just old, not just eerie. Life. The police came within the hour. The property was taped off. Forensics was called in. They confirmed the remains were human, female, ages estimated at 7 and 10. Cause of death was unclear, but there were no obvious signs of trauma, no blood, no breaks. It was as if they had simply curled up and died. Next to the doll, the police logged the find and word spread fast. Local news stations aired segments titled Long Cold Mystery Reopened in Small Illinois Town and Missing Campbell Girls Believed Found After 48 Years. There was even a brief national media flare-up. A true crime podcast did a special episode. Paranormal forums lit up with theories. Some people celebrated the closure. Others weren't so sure it was a solution at all, especially when they learned what happened next. The doll was taken into evidence, as expected, placed inside a sealed plastic container by an evidence tech named Officer Schultz. He later told colleagues he didn't like touching it, said it gave him a feeling like being stared at from the inside. They laughed him off. The doll was transported to the county facility, locked, shelved, filed, everything by the book. But the next morning, when the lead detective returned to catalog new items, the evidence bin was missing. Not just the doll, the entire bin. The lock on the cage hadn't been tampered with. The logs showed no after-hours access. No one on staff had checked anything out. The security cameras had nothing, just 3 hours of black static from 2:03 a.m. to 5:11 a.m. No explanation. No footprints. No prints at all. Just the empty shelf. In a dull, lingering scent, like burnt plastic and something sour. They searched the entire facility. The trash, the dumpsters, the loading bay, every desk, locker, and drawer. Nothing. The doll had vanished, just like the girls. The department released a vague statement about ongoing forensic processing and refused to comment further. But internally, the case went cold again, only now it had taken something with it. Jenna and Marcus moved out within weeks. They never gave a formal reason. Their blog stopped updating, their social media accounts went private. One follower claimed they left a cryptic final post that simply said, "Some things don't want to be uncovered." Others say that post never existed, that it was wiped clean, like everything else. The house was relisted in October. Empty again. They're still waiting. Some nights, people say you can hear a music box playing faintly from the back of the property. Just a few soft notes. The same notes Sarah hummed. The tune no one could ever identify. The one that didn't exist anywhere but in nightmares. The official explanation was never released to the public. Internally, they called it a recording error, an inventory misplacement, and eventually a loss due to evidence room mishandling. No one said the word stolen. No one wanted to, because that would have meant someone wanted that doll. The case was quietly reclassified as inconclusive, no formal blame assigned. Officer Schultz took an early retirement. He and his wife moved out of state 2 months later. He never spoke to the press, but a neighbor claimed she once overheard him in the garage at 3 a.m. sobbing and saying, "I should have burned it." The doll was gone. Again, some thought it was destroyed. Others believed it was never real to begin with. That the whole story was a town's collective trauma, folded into myth. Just another ghost tale to scare teenagers. But then there were those other reports. Small ones, easy to dismiss. A family in Indiana reported that their toddler kept talking to a red-haired boy she said lived under her bed. They thought it was an imaginary friend until she told them he knew the color of her grandmother's coffin lining. No one had ever told her that. In Ohio, a Goodwill store clerk claimed a strange man came in late one night trying to donate a doll he couldn't get rid of. The clerk said its eyes moved. The man bolted when she refused to take it. And in a forgotten thread on a defunct message board, a user posted a grainy photo in 2024 of what appeared to be a vintage Chucky-style doll. Same overalls, same plastic grin, sitting in a subway car in New York, left alone on a seat. The user wrote, "It was just there. I swear it looked at me. I didn't get on the train." The photo vanished days later. The account that posted it was deleted. And then there was Lorraine. She was still alive. 87 years old, living in a care facility just 2 hours from her old home. She never remarried, never had more children. She kept a single photograph in a weathered frame on her nightstand. Emily and Sarah, taken the summer before they vanished. She rarely spoke, but sometimes, late at night when the orderlies checked on her, they said she was whispering to someone in the dark. Not memories, conversations. One aide swore she saw a small red-hailed doll sitting in the corner of Lorraine's room one evening. She turned away to grab a blanket. When she looked back, it was gone. No one believed her. They never do. Lorraine died in her sleep on October 31st, 2024. Halloween, her last words, according to the nurse on duty, were, "Me promised me he'd bring him back." No one attended the funeral except a volunteer from the home. The girl's remains, confirmed through DNA, were reburied beside her. Small stones, no inscriptions, just names. But even in death, there were no real answers, only fragments, shadows, echoes of something too old, too deep to name. Somewhere out there, the doll still exists. People say it shows up in places tied to grief, the forgotten rooms, closed closets, basements, where something was left unfinished. It never knocks, never speaks aloud. But if you listen closely, if the air goes still and the lights dim, you might hear a faint plastic creak, like a tiny neck turning toward you. And then the whisper, "I promise. I can bring them back, just say yes." But you shouldn't. But you never say yes. Because it never gives without taking. And what it takes never returns the same. Do you enjoy stories like this? Please leave a comment and let us know your thoughts. Thank you for watching this video and subscribe to the channel.